first thing, if you haven't already watched the safety video for volunteers and also signed off on the waiver form, please do that first. There's an active link to that in the comments for this video if you've come to this through YouTube, or you can navigate to it from the address that you see right here. So please do that first. One of the challenges we have on the Knotweed Trail in terms of management is certain invasive plants, and one of the most troublesome ones is Japanese knotweed. This plant evolved in volcanic areas in Japan and was brought into this country because, for ornamental reasons, because it actually is a really pretty plant. However, it's evolved for disturbance, and it's very competitive, grows quickly and fills up spaces and outcompetes other plants. So we want to try to control the spread of this plant. And there are different ways to do it, but what we've decided to try is cutting. And so our strategy for this plant, if you want to help, would be to get yourself a pair of hand pruners. That's all you need. And we want to cut the stems. So cut them off down here near the ground. Never pull. We don't want to pull up the roots because any piece of a root that gets lost or composted or washes down the waterway can start a new plant. And it really doesn't help to pull up the roots the way we're trying to manage it. So we really don't want to pull it, we want to cut it. And then it's important to let the cuttings dry completely, because until they're dry, they can also regenerate and start a new plant. So wherever you choose to work, you need to have a place that you can let the cuttings dry out for a few days, and then you need to bring them back, and you can put them back on the bed. We may try to designate some particular areas for knotweed dryouts, but if you find a location where you can just let them dry inconspicuously for a few days and then come and just put them right back where they came from. And then the most important part is to repeat as often as needed. And so you can cut, if you pick an area where you want to work, you can cut the knotweed out of it as often as you want. But I guess we would ask that you maybe come back once a month and trim it back. Now this is going to take several years, most likely. This isn't a kind of thing where you're going to cut it once and it's not going to come back. It's going to come back. Now you may think that this would be the best place to start, an area here that's completely covered with knotweed and is really given over to the knotweed. But that's actually not what we would recommend in terms of picking a location. What we might suggest is that you instead pick a more defined location where it's just starting. Okay, and so Michelle noticed that knotweed was starting to come up around the rocks here. And so she went in and cut it and piled it here out of the way, but in an area where it can't wash away. It'll dry out in just a few days, and then it can go back and get composted in some inconspicuous place. So this is a great spot to keep it from starting. Another strategy is to pick a place where the knotweed is there, but it's surrounded by good things or by better things. And in that case, you don't want to just start in the middle, so the best strategy is to start at the edges. Okay, so start here at the edges and start cutting it back from the edges. Here's another area where you might want to start. This is a bit more of an infestation, but again, start at the edge and start working toward the center to remove the knotweed. And what's going to happen as you do this, the next time when you come back to cut it, most likely there will be more smaller stalks there. Okay, so now it's going to be a little bit harder to remove because they're smaller and there are more of them. But this is a step in the right direction because now the other plants can compete better. Okay, this lower growing knotweed doesn't take up so much of the sunshine, so the other plants will be able to compete better. Another thing to look for when you decide which knotweed to start cutting is if there are other plants in here to fill in. And so one of the things that grows in the same place as knotweed is this little plant here. It's called jewelweed. It's just coming up from seed. And jewelweed is an annual, and so jewelweed likes to grow in the same disturbed places that knotweed does. But it's much less of a problem because, first of all, it's a native plant. It has pretty flowers, and the butterflies and bees like them. And in addition, because it's an annual, it comes back from seed every year, and the plant is really easy to pull. So if we decide we want to plant something else in here, we can pull that jewelweed out and put something else in really easily. That's not the case with knotweed. So if we could replace the knotweed with jewelweed that came back every year, that would be a real improvement. So here's where that's kind of been happening, okay? So this could be an area where, I'm not sure if this is where somebody's been pulling for a number of years or if it's the knotweed just getting started. But this is a perfect place to come in and clip out these few little bits of knotweed before they really get started. So this would be like the very best place to start remediating and start trying to prevent it from spreading. Some other strategies for removing knotweed involve herbicide. And we may want to do that at some point for some stands, but there are challenges with herbicide and it has to be done really correctly. So somebody came in, and we don't know who, and used herbicide on knotweed this spring, and you can see it's really unsightly where the plant has died back. Okay, and then like a couple weeks later, it's all kind of completely recovered. So it's really just sort of a waste of herbicide, and plus it makes things look nasty. So this isn't a strategy that we want to use. Just using herbicide willy-nilly is just not going to help, and it makes things look bad. It can damage other plants as well. Another strategy involves smothering the knotweed, and so people have used what's called a sheet mulching technique, where they put down cardboard or newspaper and then cover it with mulch, or sometimes people cover it with plastic or other things to try to just starve it out. And that also sort of works, but you can see the knotweed is poking up through these areas where it's been smothered and coming up around the edges. And so this is a long process, and it doesn't happen really quickly. And while it's happening, things don't look really nice, and there aren't any plants there, so there's nothing for animals to eat. There's nothing that's taking up the carbon out of the atmosphere. And so except in special situations, our go-to strategy is not going to be to try and smother the knotweed. Areas along the creek are really tricky, and that's knotweed's favorite place to grow, is in these, it's like in floodplains. But we want to be really careful that we don't destabilize the banks down here. So we shouldn't just be cutting knotweed along the creek without very careful consideration. Our motto is something is better than nothing, and to hold the stream bank, that's really true. So we want to be really careful about that. There are some cases where we might be able to think about at least cutting back some of the knotweed. And so here there's knotweed, and then we've got some May-apples down in here, and then a bunch of jewelweed up on the slope. So it might be worth trying to just very carefully cut the knotweed back from around this May-apple and let the jewelweed take over. It comes up a little bit later when the May-apple has kind of gone dormant. And here's another area where there's some knotweed here right next to the stream, but these stalks here, they're from jewelweed that grew last year. And so we want to really keep an eye on this and make sure that we let the jewelweed grow. Okay, we don't, sometimes I'm concerned that people might mistake jewelweed for knotweed because it does get kind of tall. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen and that we allow the jewelweed to grow and help stabilize these banks. If you're interested in adopting a spot to control knotweed on, if you want to reach out to someone from the Friends of the Kenwood Heritage Trail, that would be great. And we've got contact information for you. Thanks.